The scorching summer sun beat down on the parched earth of Silverwater Creek, Texas, as Beatrice Davis clutched her swollen belly and stumbled toward the town's wellspring. It was 1877, and the West was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, especially to a woman 8 months pregnant and entirely alone. Beatrice's throat burned with thirst as she dragged herself forward, one hand supporting her back, the other grasping for the well's stone edge. The journey from her small homestead had taken twice as long as usual, each step more laborious than the last. She had nearly reached the wooden bucket when the world began to spin around her. Her vision blurred, dark spots dancing before her eyes. The last thing she remembered was her knees buckling beneath her, the ground rushing up to meet her, and then nothing. Yates Jackson saw the woman fall from 50 yards away. He had just ridden into town, his horse kicking up dust from the long trail, when he spotted her slender figure stumbling toward the wellspring. There was something desperate in her movements that caught his attention, and when she collapsed, he didn't hesitate. Whoa! He pulled his horse to a stop, swinging down from the saddle in one fluid motion. Long strides carried him to the woman's side in seconds, his spurs jingling with each hurried step. Kneeling beside her, he immediately noticed her condition, the swell of her belly evident beneath her simple cotton dress. "Madam," Yates touched her shoulder gently, receiving no response. Her face was flushed, her skin hot to the touch. Dehydration, he guessed, glancing at the well just a few feet away. Poor woman had nearly made it. With practiced hands, he drew water from the well, filling the bucket that had fallen beside her. He dampened his bandana and pressed it to her forehead, then carefully lifted her upper body, cradling her against his chest. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice low and steady. He supported her head with one arm while bringing a dipper of water to her lips with his free hand. "Take a small sip if you can." Beatrice's eyelids fluttered. The world returned to her in fragments, the coolness of water on her lips, the solid strength of arms around her, and a man's voice, deep and reassuring. She took a small sip, then another, the water bringing her back to consciousness. "That's it," the man encouraged. "Not too much at once." When she finally opened her eyes fully, she found herself looking up at a stranger with concerned hazel eyes, partially shadowed by the brim of his weathered cowboy hat. His face was tanned and lean, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. Beatrice tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Don't try to talk just yet," he said. "Have a little more water first." She obeyed, drinking carefully as he held the dipper to her lips. When she had taken enough, she attempted to sit up straighter. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened. I just felt so dizzy." "It's this heat," Yates replied, adjusting his hold to support her better. "Not fit for man nor beast today, let alone a lady in your condition." His gaze briefly dropped to her belly. Beatrice flushed, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. She was a stranger in this town, having arrived just 2 months ago. She didn't know this man or anyone else in Silverwater Creek well enough to be comfortable in such a position. "I should get home," she said, attempting to rise. "Easy now," Yates cautioned, helping her sit up fully but not letting go. "You shouldn't be walking anywhere just yet. Where's your husband? I can fetch him for you." The question struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She looked away, her hands instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. "There is no husband," she admitted quietly. "Not anymore." Yates nodded, asking no further questions on the matter. It wasn't his place, and he'd seen enough of life to know that stories of loss were common in these parts. "My name's Yates Jackson," he offered instead. "Just rode into town. Was heading to the general store when I saw you fall." "Beatrice Davis," she replied. "I have a small place about a mile north of here. I can manage now, truly." But when she tried to stand, her legs buckled again. Yates caught her easily, his strong arms preventing another fall. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Davis, but you're in no condition to walk a mile in this heat," he said firmly. "My horse is right over there. I'll take you home." Beatrice wanted to refuse. She'd been managing on her own since her husband's death 6 months ago, determined to build a life for her child away from the painful memories of St. Louis. Her pride demanded she continue that independence. But the baby kicked strongly inside her, as if reminding her that pride wouldn't serve either of them if she collapsed again with no one around to help. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, she conceded. That's very kind. Yates helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying arm around her waist. He filled her bucket with water and carried it to his horse, securing it to his saddle. Then he returned to assist Beatrice. I'll lift you up, if that's all right, he said. At her nod, he placed his hands at her waist and effortlessly lifted her onto his horse. The animal stood perfectly still, well-trained and calm. Yates mounted behind her, one arm securing her while the other took the reins. Just tell me which way, he said, his voice close to her ear. As they rode slowly through the heat of the day, Beatrice directed him toward her homestead. She was acutely aware of his presence, the solid chest at her back, the arm that held her securely, the clean scent of leather and open air that surrounded him. You new to these parts, Mr. Jackson? She asked, breaking the silence. Just passing through, he replied. Been working cattle drives up from Texas to Kansas, but thought I might settle somewhere for a spell. Getting tired of always being on the move. Silverwater Creek is quiet, Beatrice said. That's why I chose it. Yates nodded, though she couldn't see it. Quiet can be good. Been around enough commotion to last a lifetime. They crested a small rise, and her modest homestead came into view. It wasn't much, a small cabin with a lean-to-stable attached, a chicken coop, and the beginnings of a vegetable garden. But it was hers, paid for with the money her husband had left her. This is it, she said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. Yates surveyed the property with an experienced eye. You've done well for yourself, Mrs. Davis. Building a place alone isn't easy. The cabin was here already. I've just been trying to make it livable. She hesitated. And please, call me Beatrice. Mrs. Davis makes me feel like someone's grandmother. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Beatrice it is, then. He helped her down from the horse when they reached the cabin, then carried the water bucket inside for her. The interior was simple but neat, a small table with 2 chairs, a cook stove, a bed in one corner with a colorful quilt, and a rocking chair near the single window. You should rest, Yates advised, setting the bucket down. That heat won't do you or the little one any favors. Beatrice nodded, suddenly exhausted. Thank you again for your help, Mr. Jackson. Yates, he corrected gently. And it was no trouble. He hesitated at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Would it be all right if I stopped by tomorrow? Just to make sure you're faring well. The offer surprised her. In the 2 months she'd been in Silverwater Creek, few people had shown her any particular kindness. She was an outsider, a widow with no family, and her condition made many of the townswomen whisper behind their hands. That would be kind, she said finally. But please don't feel obligated. No obligation, Yates assured her. Just seems the neighborly thing to do. After he left, Beatrice sank into her rocking chair, one hand resting on her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. She found herself wondering about Yates Jackson, where he had come from, what had driven him to a life on the move, and why he had stopped to help a stranger when so many would have ridden past. Well, little one, she murmured to her unborn child. It seems we might have found a friend after all. True to his word, Yates returned the next day. He arrived mid-morning, leading his horse and carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Beatrice had been feeding her chickens, feeling much recovered from the previous day's episode. She straightened when she saw him approaching, unconsciously smoothing her hair and apron. Good morning, he called, stopping at a respectful distance. Thought I'd check on you as promised. I'm much better today, thank you, she replied, closing the chicken coop gate. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. Yates accepted with a nod, tying his horse to the hitching post before following her inside. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. Brought you something, he said, extending the package once they were inside. Nothing fancy, just some dried fruits from the general store. Thought they might be good for you. Beatrice accepted the gift with surprise. That's very thoughtful. You didn't have to do that. My mother always said fruit was important for expectant mothers, he replied with a slight shrug. Course, she had 7 of us, so I reckon she knew what she was talking about. 7. Beatrice laughed as she poured him coffee. Your poor mother. She loved every minute of it, Yates said, a fond smile softening his features. Even when we were driving her to distraction, they settled at the small table, and Beatrice found herself relaxing in his company. There was something steady about Yates Jackson, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but commanded respect nonetheless. "What brings you to Silverwater Creek?" she asked. "It's not exactly on the main cattle trails." Yates wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, considering his answer. "Heard there might be work at the Peterson Ranch outside town. Old trail boss of mine mentioned they were looking for experienced hands." "The Peterson place is the largest around here," Beatrice confirmed. "I haven't met Mr. Peterson, but I've heard he's fair to his workers." "That's more than can be said for some," Yates remarked. After a moment, he asked, "And what brought you here, if you don't mind my asking?" Beatrice hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling him. "My husband, James, died 6 months ago. Influenza. We were living in St. Louis, but after he passed." She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "I needed a fresh start. Somewhere I could raise this child away from the memories and the pity." "I'm sorry about your husband," Yates said sincerely. "Thank you." She looked down at her hands. "It was very sudden. We'd only been married 2 years. And no family to help you." She shook her head. "My parents died when I was young. James had a brother, but he's in California. I wrote to him when James died, but never received a reply." Yates frowned at that, but made no comment. Instead, he asked, "How are you managing here? On your own?" "I have some money saved," Beatrice explained. "And I sell eggs in town. Once the baby comes, I plan to take in sewing. I was a seamstress before I married." "Seems you've thought it all through," Yates observed, respect evident in his tone. "I've had to," she replied simply. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Yates told her about his years working cattle drives, about the sights he'd seen across the Western Territories. Beatrice shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania and her dreams for her small homestead. When he finally rose to leave, Beatrice was surprised to find herself reluctant to see him go. "I should head into town, see about that job at Peterson's," he explained, settling his hat back on his head. "Of course," she said, walking him to the door. "Thank you again for checking on me. And for the fruit." Yates paused at the threshold. "Would it be all right if I stopped by again? Maybe help with some chores around your place? Can't be easy doing everything yourself." The offer was tempting. There were indeed tasks she struggled with in her condition: repairing the chicken coop roof, fixing the loose boards on the lean-to, chopping enough firewood. "I wouldn't want to impose on your time," she said hesitantly. "It's no imposition," he assured her. "Honestly, I'd welcome the company. Don't know many folks around here yet." That was how it began, Yates checking in every few days, helping with the heavier work around Beatrice's homestead. He did indeed secure employment at the Peterson Ranch, and though the work kept him busy, he always found time to ride over to her place. Sometimes he brought small gifts: fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, a jar of honey from a local beekeeper, once even a length of blue ribbon he thought might match her eyes. Never anything extravagant, just thoughtful tokens that showed he'd been thinking of her. For Beatrice, his visits became the highlight of her days. Living alone, she hadn't realized how much she missed simple conversation, the comfort of another person's presence. With Yates, she found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done much since James died. 2 weeks after their first meeting, they sat on her porch in the cooling evening air. Yates had spent the afternoon repairing her roof, and now they were enjoying the respite from the day's heat. "Baby's been active today," Beatrice commented, rubbing her side where a tiny foot or elbow was pressing outward. Yates glanced at her with interest. "Is that normal? All that moving around?" "I believe so," she said, smiling. "Though this one seems particularly restless, especially in the evenings." "May I?" Yates asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her belly. The request surprised her, but after a moment's consideration, Beatrice nodded. She took his hand, calloused and strong from years of ranch work, and placed it where the baby was kicking. Yates went perfectly still, his expression transforming into one of wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "That's something else." "It is rather miraculous," Beatrice agreed, unexpectedly moved by his reaction. His hand lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly proper before he withdrew it, clearing his throat. "Thank you for sharing that." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Crickets began their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I never thought I'd end up here," Beatrice admitted suddenly. When I married James, I imagined us growing old together in St. Louis, raising a house full of children. Funny how life takes unexpected turns. Yates nodded, his gaze on the horizon. I know something about that. Had plans of my own once. A ranch in Colorado. Almost had enough saved up when the bank failed in '73. Lost everything. I'm sorry, Beatrice said softly. Is that still your dream? Your own ranch. Used to be, he replied. These days, I'm not so sure what I'm looking for anymore. Just know I'm tired of drifting. The wistfulness in his voice touched something in Beatrice. She understood the longing for roots, for something permanent in a world that could change in an instant. Well, I hope you find what you're searching for, she told him sincerely. Yates turned to look at her, the fading sunlight catching in his eyes. I'm beginning to think maybe I have. The words hung between them, filled with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, and she looked away first. It's getting late, she said, changing the subject. And you have an early start tomorrow. Yates accepted the shift in conversation gracefully. That I do. Peterson wants us to move the herd to the north pasture. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. I might not be able to come by for a few days. We'll be camping with the herd until the move is complete. I understand, Beatrice assured him. I'll be fine. All the same, I've asked Mrs. Wilson from town to check on you, he said. She runs the boarding house. Said she'd come by day after tomorrow. Beatrice was touched by his thoughtfulness. That's very kind, but not necessary. Humor me, Yates said with a small smile. It would ease my mind to know someone's looking in on you. She couldn't find it in herself to refuse when he put it that way. All right, thank you. As promised, Mrs. Wilson appeared 2 days later, a robust woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and a basket of fresh-baked goods. So you're the widow Davis, she said after introducing herself. Yates was quite insistent I make sure you're doing well. Says you're too proud to ask for help even when you need it. Beatrice couldn't help but laugh. He has me figured out already, it seems. Mrs. Wilson's shrewd eyes took in the neat cabin and Beatrice's condition. When are you due, dear? About 4 weeks, the doctor in St. Louis said. Mrs. Wilson nodded. Well, you shouldn't be alone when the time comes. Do you have arrangements? Beatrice hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead, focused as she'd been on simply making it through each day. Not yet, she admitted. Well, that won't do, Mrs. Wilson declared. I've helped bring plenty of babies into this world. When your time comes, you send word to me. The boarding house isn't far. That's very generous, Beatrice said, genuinely grateful. Not generosity, just common sense, Mrs. Wilson replied briskly. Women need to look out for each other in these parts. She paused, then added more gently. Yates is a good man. Known him for years, whenever he passes through. Never seen him so concerned about anyone before. Beatrice felt a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. We're friends, she said carefully. He's been very kind. Mrs. Wilson's knowing smile suggested she saw more than Beatrice was willing to admit. Of course, dear. Just friends. Before she left, Mrs. Wilson insisted on showing Beatrice how to prepare an herbal tea that would help with the swelling in her ankles and promised to return in a few days with more supplies. True to his word, Yates was gone nearly a week. When he finally returned, riding up to her homestead in the golden light of late afternoon, Beatrice was surprised by how glad she was to see him. He looked tired, his face more weathered than before, but he smiled when he saw her waiting on the porch. Missed this place, he said by way of greeting as he dismounted. Just the place, Beatrice teased, immediately blushing at her own boldness. Yates's smile widened. No, not just the place. He had brought her a gift, a small carved wooden horse. Made it during the night watches, he explained, somewhat self-consciously. Thought the little one might like it someday. Beatrice ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the hours of careful work that had gone into the simple toy. It's beautiful, Yates. Thank you. That evening, as they shared a simple meal, Beatrice noticed Yates watching her with an intensity that made her both nervous and exhilarated. Is something wrong? She finally asked. No, he said slowly. Just thinking. About what? He set down his fork. About how much has changed in a few weeks. When I rode into Silverwater Creek, I didn't expect to find anything but a temporary job. Certainly didn't expect to find someone like you. Beatrice's heart quickened. And is that? A good thing. The best thing that's happened to me in a long while, Yates admitted. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I know your heart still belongs to your husband, and I respect that. But I wanted you to know that I care for you, Beatrice. More than I thought possible in such a short time. The declaration, simple and honest, brought tears to her eyes. Yates, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking for promises. Just wanted you to know where I stand. Beatrice turned her hand over, letting her fingers entwine with his. James will always have a place in my heart, she said softly. He was my first love, and he gave me this child. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for someone else. The hope that flared in Yates's eyes made her continue, brave in a way she hadn't been in months. I care for you too, she confessed. More than I expected. More than I thought I could, after James. Yates squeezed her hand gently. We can take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The promise hung in the air between them, a bridge to a future Beatrice hadn't dared imagine until now. Their courtship progressed slowly over the next 3 weeks. Yates continued his work at the Peterson Ranch, but spent most of his free time at Beatrice's homestead. They were careful to maintain propriety. He never stayed after dark, and Mrs. Wilson often accompanied Beatrice to town, lending respectability to the arrangement. But there was no denying the growing connection between them. Each day, Beatrice found herself falling more deeply for this quiet, steadfast man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. They were walking the perimeter of her property one evening, Yates's arm supporting her as they moved slowly along the fence line, when Beatrice felt the first sharp pain. She gasped, stopping abruptly. Yates looked at her with concern. What is it? I'm not sure, she said, one hand pressed to her lower back. Just a twinge. They continued walking, but 10 minutes later, another pain gripped her, this one stronger than the first. Beatrice gripped Yates's arm tightly, breathing through the discomfort. Beatrice. Alarm colored his voice now. I think, she said carefully, the baby might be coming. Yates's eyes widened. Now? But I thought you had another week at least. Babies don't always follow schedules, she said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction began. Yates didn't hesitate. He swept her into his arms, ignoring her protests that she could walk, and carried her back to the cabin. Once inside, he settled her on the bed and knelt beside her. What do you need? Should I fetch Mrs. Wilson? Beatrice nodded, trying to stay calm. Yes, please. And Dr. Holcomb, if he's in town. Yates pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. I'll be as fast as I can. Will you be all right until I get back? I'll be fine, she assured him, though fear was beginning to take hold. The first baby usually takes time. He left reluctantly, riding hard for town. The wait seemed endless to Beatrice as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. She tried to prepare what she could, heating water, laying out clean linens, but soon had to stop and focus solely on breathing through the increasingly powerful pains. Relief flooded her when she heard hoofbeats approaching, followed by voices. Mrs. Wilson bustled in first, taking charge immediately. Let's see how far along you are, dear, she said, all business. Yates hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Dr. Holcomb's away delivering another baby, he explained. Won't be back until morning. We'll manage just fine, Mrs. Wilson assured them both. I've delivered more babies than that young doctor anyway. She turned to Yates. You make yourself useful outside. Keep water boiling and bring it when I call. He looked to Beatrice, clearly reluctant to leave her side. She managed a nod of encouragement despite her pain. It's all right. I'm in good hands. The labor progressed more quickly than anyone expected for a first birth. Perhaps it was the walk that had helped things along, or perhaps the baby was simply eager to enter the world. Whatever the reason, barely 4 hours after the first contraction, Mrs. Wilson was instructing Beatrice to push. Outside, Yates paced anxiously, wincing at each cry he heard from within the cabin. He had faced stampeding cattle, flash floods, and armed bandits without flinching, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness he felt now, listening to Beatrice's pain and unable to ease it. When the baby's first lusty cry split the night air, he stopped mid-step, his heart seeming to pause before racing forward. A few minutes later, Mrs. Wilson appeared at the door, her face tired but triumphant. You can come in now, she said. They're both doing fine. Yates entered cautiously, his hat in his hands. The sight that greeted him stole his breath away. Beatrice sat propped against pillows, her face glowing despite her obvious exhaustion, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet her," Beatrice invited softly. "My daughter." Yates approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He peered down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets, a perfect little nose, rosebud mouth, and a wisp of dark hair. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her mother." Beatrice smiled up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Would you like to hold her?" The question caught him off guard. "I've never held a baby before. I might do it wrong." "There's no wrong way," Beatrice assured him. "Just support her head." With the utmost care, Yates took the newborn in his arms, marveling at how little she weighed. The baby squirmed slightly, then settled, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to wave in the air. Without thinking, Yates offered his finger, and the infant grasped it with surprising strength. Something shifted in his chest at that moment, a certainty, a belonging he'd never felt before. Looking from the child to Beatrice, he knew with absolute clarity that he wanted to be part of their lives, to protect them both, to build a future together. "What will you name her?" he asked. Beatrice considered for a moment. "Sophia," she decided. "It means wisdom." Sophia Grace Davis. "It's perfect," Yates agreed, carefully returning the baby to her mother's arms. "She's perfect." Mrs. Wilson, who had been quietly cleaning up, announced that she would stay the night to help with the baby. "You should get some rest too," she told Yates. "Nothing more to be done tonight." But Yates couldn't bring himself to leave. Instead, he settled into the rocking chair near the bed, determined to keep watch over mother and child through the night. In the quiet hours that followed, as Beatrice drifted in and out of sleep and the newborn nursed and dozed, Yates made a decision. When morning came, he rode into town with a purpose, returning by midday with a small velvet pouch in his pocket. He found Beatrice awake, sitting in the rocking chair with Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Mrs. Wilson had stepped out to gather fresh eggs from the coop. "How are you feeling?" he asked, kneeling beside the chair. "Tired," Beatrice admitted. "But happy. So very happy." Yates took a deep breath. "Beatrice, there's something I need to say." She looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "I know it hasn't been long," he began, "and some might say it's too soon. But life out here has taught me that when you find something precious, you don't wait to claim it." He took the pouch from his pocket and emptied a simple gold band onto his palm. "I love you, Beatrice Davis. I love you and this little girl as if she were my own. I want to be a husband to you and a father to Sophia, if you'll have me." Beatrice's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Yates, I'm not a wealthy man," he continued earnestly, "but I'm a hard worker. I can provide for you both, protect you. Most of all, I can love you every day for the rest of our lives." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. "You're sure? This isn't just because of the baby?" "I was sure the day I found you at the Wellspring," Yates confessed. "Everything since has only made me more certain." Beatrice looked down at her daughter, then back to the man kneeling before her, this good, honest man who had come into her life when she needed him most. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Yates Jackson." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her gently. Sophia stirred between them, and Yates placed a tender kiss on the baby's head as well. "My family," he said, wonder in his voice. "My own family at last." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silverwater Creek. Mrs. Wilson stood as witness, holding baby Sophia throughout the brief ceremony. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious about the widow who had married the cowboy who'd saved her at the Wellspring. Yates had negotiated with Mr. Peterson for the use of a small cabin on the ranch property, closer to his work but still offering Beatrice independence. They moved in the day after the wedding, transforming the simple structure into a home with Beatrice's quilts and the few pieces of furniture from her homestead. Life settled into a new rhythm. Yates rode out each morning to work with the cattle, returning each evening to his wife and daughter. Beatrice established a small garden, kept chickens as she had before, and began taking in sewing work from the women in town. Baby Sophia thrived, growing stronger and more alert each day. 3 months after Sophia's birth, Yates came home with news that would change their lives once more. Peterson's offering me a partnership, he announced over dinner. Not a full share, mind you, but a stake in the ranch. Says I've got a good head for the business, and he's getting too old to manage it all himself. Beatrice set down her fork, stunned. Yates, that's wonderful. A partnership in a ranch like Peterson's, that's everything you've worked for. Not everything, he corrected, reaching across the table to take her hand. You and Sophia are everything. But this means security for us all. A future. I'm so proud of you, Beatrice said, squeezing his fingers. You deserve this. There's more, Yates continued. Peterson wants us to move into the main house. His wife passed last winter, and he says it's too big for just him. There'd be plenty of room for us, and you wouldn't be alone all day while I'm working. The prospect was enticing. The Peterson Ranch house was the finest in the county, 2 stories with glass windows, proper furniture, and even a small library, from what Beatrice had heard. What about our cabin? She asked. I've grown fond of it. We could keep it, Yates suggested. Use it when we want time to ourselves. But the main house would give Sophia room to grow, and any brothers or sisters that might come along. Beatrice blushed at the implication. They had discussed having more children someday, building the large family Yates had grown up with and that Beatrice had always wanted. If you think it's best, she agreed. The move to the main house marked the beginning of a new chapter. Mr. Peterson, a gruff but kind-hearted widower in his 60s, doted on baby Sophia and treated Beatrice like the daughter he'd never had. Under Yates's management, the ranch prospered, expanding its operations and gaining a reputation for the quality of its stock. As winter gave way to spring, Beatrice found herself with child once more. The news filled Yates with joy. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around when she told him, then immediately apologized for being too rough. I'm not made of glass, she laughed, pressing his hand to her still flat stomach. But in about 7 months, we'll have another little one to love. Life wasn't without challenges. The winter of 1878 was particularly harsh, with blizzards that threatened the cattle and made travel impossible for weeks. Yates worked tirelessly alongside the other ranch hands to save as many animals as possible, often returning to the house exhausted and half-frozen. When spring finally arrived, they counted their blessings. They had lost fewer cattle than most ranches in the area. Sophia was growing into a happy, curious toddler, and Beatrice's pregnancy was progressing well. Their second child, a son they named William James Jackson, was born on a perfect summer evening in 1879. Unlike his sister's hurried entry into the world, Will took his time, arriving after nearly 20 hours of labor that left Beatrice drained but triumphant. Yates, who had refused to leave her side despite the doctor's suggestions, wept openly when he held his son for the first time. Thank you, he whispered to Beatrice, for everything. As the years passed, the Jackson family grew and flourished. A second son, Henry, joined them in 1881, followed by twin girls, Elizabeth and Margaret, in 1883. Sophia, the eldest, took her role as big sister seriously, helping Beatrice with the younger children and displaying a natural talent with horses that delighted her stepfather. By 1887, the Peterson Ranch had become the Jackson Ranch following the old man's peaceful passing in his sleep. He had no heirs of his own and had long since come to consider Yates and Beatrice family. His will left the ranch to them with the simple request that they continue to run it with the same integrity he had valued. On the 10th anniversary of the day Yates had found Beatrice at the Wellspring, they returned to the spot together. The town had grown considerably in the decades since, with new buildings and businesses lining the main street, but the old stone wall remained unchanged. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years, Beatrice said, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they stood beside the well. At 34, she was still beautiful, though her face now held the gentle lines of motherhood and laughter. Best 10 years of my life, Yates replied, his arm around her waist. At 40, his hair was beginning to silver at the temples, but he remained as strong and steady as the day they'd met. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into town that day? Beatrice asked. If you'd been an hour later, or taken a different route? Yates shook his head. Some things are meant to be, I reckon. I was always headed toward you, Beatrice. Just took me a while to find my way. She smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm glad you found me." "So am I," he said, bending to kiss her softly. "So am I." They walked back to where their children waited with the wagon. Sophia, now 10 and as graceful as her mother. Will, 8 and already showing his father's quiet strength. Henry, 6 and full of mischief. And the twins, 4, identical in appearance, but as different as night and day in temperament. Watching them climb aboard, Beatrice felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This family, this life they had built together, it had all begun with a moment of weakness that had turned out to be her greatest strength. "Are you all right?" Yates asked, noticing her emotion. "Perfect," she assured him, taking his hand as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Just thinking how fortunate I am." "We both are," he agreed, settling beside her and taking the reins. As they drove home, the setting sun painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a pregnant widow alone in a strange town to the matriarch of a thriving family and ranch, it was more than she could have dreamed possible when she'd left St. Louis all those years ago. And it had all begun at a wellspring, with a kind cowboy who had drawn water and held her in his arms. 20 years after that fateful day, Beatrice and Yates stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as their eldest daughter rode away in a buggy with her new husband. Sophia had married the town doctor's son, a young man with ambitions of opening a hospital in the growing city of Denver. "She'll be fine," Yates assured Beatrice, noticing the tears she tried to hide. "Robert's a good man, and Denver's not so far that they can't visit." "I know," Beatrice sighed. "It's just hard to let go." Inside the house, their remaining children were clearing away the remnants of the wedding feast. Will, now 18 and the spitting image of his father, had taken over much of the daily ranch management. Henry, 16, had a gift for numbers and handled the books. The twins, 14, were as different as ever. Elizabeth, quiet and studious, already talking of becoming a teacher, while Margaret rode as well as any cowhand and declared she would never leave the ranch. "We've done well, haven't we?" Beatrice asked, leaning against her husband of 19 years. "Better than well," Yates confirmed, his arm around her shoulders. "We've been blessed." That evening, after the younger children had gone to bed, Beatrice and Yates sat together on the porch swing, enjoying the cool night air. The ranch was peaceful, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the chirping of crickets. "I've been thinking," Yates said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe it's time we took a trip, just the two of us. We've never had a proper honeymoon." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "Leave the ranch? But who would manage everything?" "Will's more than capable, with Henry to help him. And Mrs. Patterson could look after the girls for a few weeks." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "What do you say? San Francisco, perhaps? Or New Orleans?" The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. In all their years together, they had rarely been separated, and never had they taken time just for themselves. "Where would you like to go?" she asked, warming to the possibility. "Anywhere, as long as you're with me," Yates replied. "But I thought maybe St. Louis. You could show me where you and James lived, where Sophia was born. It's part of our history, too." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. Though they rarely spoke of James now, Yates had always honored his memory, encouraging Beatrice to tell Sophia about her birth father. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Thank you." Yates kissed her then, a tender gesture that still held the passion of their early days together. "Thank you for giving me this life," he murmured against her lips. "For trusting me with your heart and with Sophia." "Thank you for finding me at the Wellspring," she replied. "For drawing water and holding me when I was at my weakest." "That wasn't weakness," Yates corrected gently. "That was strength, the strength to keep going, to build a new life for you and your child. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed a helping hand." They made the journey to St. Louis that autumn, leaving the ranch in Will's capable hands. The city had changed in the 20 years since Beatrice had left, growing larger and more modern, but she still found her way to the modest house where she and James had lived. Standing before it, her hand in Yates's, Beatrice felt a sense of completion rather than sadness. "James would be happy," she said with certainty. "He would be glad that Sophia had a father who loves her, that I found happiness again." He must have been a good man, Yates said, to have earned your love. He was, Beatrice agreed. Different from you, but good in his own way. I was fortunate to have been loved by two exceptional men in my lifetime. They visited James's grave, where Beatrice laid flowers and introduced Yates properly, speaking to the headstone as if her first husband could hear. It might have seemed strange to some, but Yates understood the importance of acknowledging the past that had shaped them both. Their journey continued to New Orleans, where they spent 2 weeks exploring the vibrant city, enjoying music and foods they had never experienced before. Beatrice bought gifts for each of their children: a medical textbook for Sophia, a silver pocket watch for Will, a leather-bound ledger for Henry, books for Elizabeth, and a finely crafted saddle for Margaret. When they returned home, the ranch was thriving under Will's management. He had even negotiated a favorable contract with a new railroad company looking to purchase beef for their dining cars. You might be working yourself out of a job, Beatrice teased her husband as Will proudly showed them the signed papers. Good, Yates replied with genuine pride. That was always the plan, to build something our children could take over one day. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both joyful and sorrowful. Sophia gave them their first grandchild, a boy named David, in 1897. Will married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, combining their properties and expanding the Jackson holdings significantly. Henry opened a bank in Silverwater Creek, which had grown into a proper town with a school, a newspaper, and even a small hotel. Elizabeth fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher, taking charge of the town school and introducing new ideas from her education at a women's college back east. Margaret, true to her word, never left the ranch, eventually marrying one of the hands and raising her own family in a house built on the property. In 1907, 30 years after their first meeting, Beatrice and Yates celebrated their anniversary with all their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered at the ranch. At 64 and 70 respectively, they had slowed down considerably but remained the heart of the family and the community. The Wellspring where they had met was now part of the town square, with a small plaque commemorating its importance to Silverwater Creek's history. Few remembered that it was also the place where a love story had begun, where a pregnant woman had collapsed and a cowboy had drawn water and held her in his arms. But Beatrice and Yates remembered. Each year on the anniversary of that day, they would visit the well together, sometimes alone, sometimes with family members who knew the story. "Best thing I ever did," Yates would say, stopping to help a stranger that day. And Beatrice would smile, knowing that what had seemed like her weakest moment had led to her greatest strength, the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. In the winter of 1912, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors, including their son-in-law Robert, who traveled from Denver to help, his condition worsened steadily. Beatrice refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair beside their bed, holding his hand through the long nights. "Don't be afraid," Yates told her as his breathing grew more labored. "We've had a good life together, Beatrice. Better than most get. I'm not ready to let you go," she whispered, tears falling unchecked. "You'll never have to," he promised. "I'll be waiting for you, just like I waited for you to wake up that day at the Wellspring." On a cold January morning, with Beatrice and all their children gathered around him, Yates Jackson took his final breath. He was 75 years old and had lived to see his ranch become one of the most prosperous in the state, his children established in their own lives, and 15 grandchildren carry on his name and legacy. Beatrice mourned deeply but found strength in the family they had created together. She continued to live in the ranch house, now with Will and his wife managing the property. Her days were filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quilting and storytelling, with the simple pleasures of a life well lived. Often, she would visit the Wellspring alone, sitting on the stone bench that had been placed beside it years earlier. Sometimes she would speak to Yates as if he were still beside her, telling him about the family's news, about how much she missed him. 5 years after Yates's passing, on a warm spring day in 1917, Beatrice asked Will to drive her to the Wellspring. At 74, she was still relatively healthy but had been feeling unusually tired lately. "Are you sure you don't want company, Mother?" Will asked as he helped her from the buggy. "I'm sure," she replied with a smile. I just want a little time alone here. I'll call when I'm ready to go home." Will reluctantly left her there, promising to return in an hour. Beatrice settled on the bench, closing her eyes as the gentle spring breeze caressed her face. She could almost feel Yates beside her, his steady presence as real to her as the stone beneath her hands. "I think I might be joining you soon," she murmured. "The doctor says my heart is wearing out." A sense of peace washed over her as she sat there, remembering. She had been blessed with so much love in her life from James, from Yates, from her children and grandchildren. She had known hardship and joy, fear and triumph. She had built a life from nothing and left a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. When Will returned an hour later, he found his mother still sitting on the bench, a serene smile on her face. But Beatrice Davis Jackson had already departed, her spirit reunited at last with the cowboy who had drawn water and held her in his arms so many years before. The Wellspring remains in Silverwater Creek to this day, now protected as a historical landmark. Few visitors know the full story of the pregnant woman who collapsed there and the cowboy who saved her. But local children are taught the legend of how the Jackson Ranch began with an act of kindness at the old stone well that changed 2 lives forever and created a dynasty that would shape the region for generations to come. And sometimes, old-timers say, if you visit the Wellspring at sunset, you might catch a glimpse of them still, a tall cowboy drawing water, a beautiful woman in his arms, their love as enduring as the western landscape that brought them together.